I mostly read public domain books here on Glenn Reads Books to You, and they were written a long time ago, so they're usually racist, or sexist, or bigoted, but in there somewhere is a story, and that's why those stories are famous. Other times, I read works from independent authors, and they're delightfully not racist, but they might have adult language or adult situations, like, making sex. So that's your warning, but I'm sure you're grown up enough to handle it. Don't write to me complaining. I don't know. Tuesday right now? Wait, it's Thursday. Wait, no, it's Friday. Oh, God damn it. All right, take a seat, you little idiot. I was just reflecting on how I have no idea what day it is thanks to the holidays. Welcome to the Glenn Reads Books to You mansion. It's a fun little bit where I pretend to live in a mansion and not just recording in my basement. This is where I read the hottest public domain books and short stories. This week, we're going to keep reading Hellflower by George O. Smith. Want to learn a little bit about the author? Sure. George O. Smith was born April 9th, 1911, and died May 27th, 1981. He was an American science fiction author. He was an active contributor to Astounding Science Fiction magazine during the golden age of fiction in the 1940s, and he collaborated with the magazine's editor, John W. Campbell Jr., and he stopped collaborating with him when he wound up sleeping with John W. Campbell Jr.'s wife, and then eventually married her in 1949. So that's all you really need to know about him. Back to me. I guess I'm doing a Seinfeld bit. I just that the week before Christmas comes up, you're like, oh boy, I'm going to have a short week. So I took Christmas Eve off and Christmas Day off because that's normal. And there's leading up to that, I'm like, yeah, here we go. I'm not going to do much work. And they're like, Glenn, you going to be able to get this done? I'm like, no, I don't know. Maybe I'll get it. I'm not sure because Christmas Eve's, guys, Christmas Eve's coming up. And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. And then Christmas Day. And then after that, I worked for a couple days because this is like on a Tuesday and a Wednesday. So I worked Thursday, Friday, but it just felt like a Monday. And then I was like, what the hell's going on? And then I woke up on a Saturday and thought, am I supposed to be at work right now? And I had to like look at the work calendar, like, no, it's Saturday. And then Sunday and then Monday comes around, and then New Year's Eve and New Year's Day was in the middle of the week again. And that just screwed me up all over again. And so then I was like, so I woke up on New Year's Day and I thought, is there like a meeting? What am I supposed to do right now? And so then I got up and I had to check. I'm like, oh, God damn it, it's Christmas. Is it Christmas Day or is it New Year's? I don't even know anymore. So that's been my whole life all week. And it's been hell on earth. My leg got fat. My leg stopped being fat. My knee kept hurting. My knee stopped hurting. I went to go see the doctor on a Friday. Who knows what Friday? Everything's washing together. And unfortunately, he says, well, you take your pants off. I look at your knee. And I was like, oh, God damn it. So I take my pants off. It's early in the morning. It's an early thing. And so then I didn't realize that when I stumbled up out of bed in the morning and put my underwear on and my pants and everything, I put on these joke underwear that my wife bought me. It's got snakes on it, and it's like silky and black. And so I pull my pants down. I'm like, oh, God damn it. So he's rubbing my knees. And when he's done rubbing my knees, he goes, your knees seem fine. You just got to, stay off them for a while. Then he just kind of kept his hands on my knees. He kept rubbing my knees. I'm like, oh my God, if he spreads my legs even just the slightest bit, I'm going to get out of here screaming. And so but then eventually I pulled up my hand. Oh, well, all right. Well, thank God for the grandfather clock telling me to shut up and get into the story. So why don't we go downstairs to the library and continue reading this book? Well, there you are. Why don't you get yourself seated? Lucky for you, I got no bits this week. I was sick over Christmas into New Year's and didn't record shit. I got Ben from Words About Books. Him and Nate have written a book, and they asked me to record an audio book for them, which I said, sure, I'll do it. And then I continued to have my life fall apart. So I'm going to start doing that this weekend. But this whole time I said, I'm not doing shit, which means I don't have any bits. I got no bits for you. I don't have any sound effects. I got nothing. So you're just going to have to deal with me reading a pretty shitty book. Chapter 17. There was no doubt about the alien quality of the city, but in its functional qualities it was very familiar. These, he realized, were developments that had been found to be effective over a long time of sheer operation. Functions that would have been mechanically similar on any planet, no matter how alien, so long as its inhabitants breathed air, ate food, and perambulated. I'm going to look up perambulated. Walk or travel around a place. Okay, I was kind of hoping it meant something else, like, I don't know, diarrhea. Buildings were mostly squarish, blocks cut with windows and doors. Shops had broad windows for displaying their wares, and even the wares were not too exotic. Clothing stores and giga stores. All right, I'm looking up giga. I'm hitting it hard at the beginning of this episode. A showy thing, especially one that's useless or worthless. Giga stores and food shops, and now and then one that sold stuff that was not to be identified by a stranger. What? The streets and alleys and gutters and sidewalks were normal. Traffic ran to the left, however, which gave Faraday some trouble because he had been used to stepping from the curb and glancing to the right. Drivers squat. He's never been on a one-way street before. I have. I've been on a one-way street before. You see the arrow showing which way it goes. You're like, oh, okay, I'll look that way. Drivers squawked at him with their horns and swore at him with their multi-tongued voices. Faraday forced himself to learn this left-handed traffic problem. He did not want to be handed a traffic ticket, nor did he want to be asked by some policeman for an explanation of his stupidity. I kind of forgot where we left off in this story. Didn't he land somewhere and have to, run around the airfield and escape? I don't remember. It's been 4 weeks or something. I read the AI Santa thing, and that kind of messed everything up. And by now, the sun was well above the horizon, and the streets began to teem. Oh! The air began to sing with the noise of people, chattering, greeting one another, generally making a racket, resembling a Chinese laundry. And an air raid, we heard the clash of metal on metal and turned to watch a couple of drivers arguing over their dented fenders. As he walked with his head turned, Faraday bumped into someone, and the man chittered something at him angrily. Faraday nodded humbly and grunted under his breath and hurried on. Almost like me in France. For some reason, people in France and Germany think I'm one of them. So just walk up and say something to me, and I was going to go, which kind of scares them off. So I can understand doing that. So did the other man, who merely replied to Faraday's grunt with a single three-tone discord before veering off and away. He had to be careful, he told himself. He had found this city so closely resembling a city of his own system that he had become careless. He knew by now that if he conducted himself without attracting attention, and if he walked without cringing, no one would think to stop him for questioning. What had Carolyn said? Something about their springing from the same basic stock some 50,000 years ago? Well, anyway, these were the same family of curious apes, who were gregarious enough to band together and still individualistic enough to resent any intrusion upon privacy. There would be most certainly three-toned hell to pay if he opened up his own trap, but so long as he kept it shut, they had no way of telling him from any of their own kind. And so he walked among them for hours until the crowd thinned and the traffic became less boisterous and frantic, and the city settled down to a quieter routine. Faraday found it hard to place this cosmopolitan culture in the same niche with a society that appeared to be systematically undermining the solitary civilization. It was quite similar to the paradox he had found in the Niles family. It was as though murder was an honorable enterprise, and that the dope sales were listed on the daily stock exchange under the commodities section. Faraday had expected to find some, monstrous ugliness here. A police or a slave state would not have surprised him. It was such a culture that usually fostered villainy. Instead, he found a city much like his own, and it was hard for Faraday to shake off the feeling that only misunderstanding between them was the age-old barrier of tongue. Eventually, he came kind of an ordinately carved building that stood with doors open. People were sauntering in and out with no obvious barrier. So Faraday followed one group at a little distance and went into the building. Oh, he could have been at any museum on Terra, for the life forms displayed were as bizarre as any of the stranger bits of artwork on the Earth or other of Sol's planets. He came upon a quiet hallway that had a non-scale model of the solar system. It was a working orrery, O-R-R-E-R-Y, orrery. Fuck you, it's my show. That told Faraday nothing other than that this system had 11 planets and a batch of satellites. None of the planets had rings like Saturn. Oh, he looked for something that could identify the parent sun for him, but he found nothing similar about any of the displays except for one. Oh, there was a small model of Sol and his planets on a pedestal. And while the sight was familiar, the lettering below was not. If the legend had said anything about distance and direction, it was not only in the aliens' terms, but in the aliens' written language. To find out where the sky was, Faraday needed a fast course in Planet Exian language, and then a 6 months concentrated course in uranography. What? What's uranography? The study of piss? A branch of astronomy concerned with describing and mapping the heavens. The study of piss. He began to understand that the matter of being lost is only a dislocation of your own frame of reference. Cities do not have large signs around the streets saying, "This is Chicago," because any man in his right senses knows that he's not in Detroit. And if he does not, there are better places for him than either city. He shunned the opportunity of visiting the enemy planetarium. Having some lecturer explain the heavens as seen from Planet X in trio voice would get him nowhere. Oh, he left the museum and began to trudge back toward the spaceport. He's hungry again. In the morning and the early afternoon, he had been frustrating, even though it had been enlightening to find some of the aliens lived and breathed and enjoyed themselves like people instead of the cold and human monsters that he expected. Faraday watched his fellows carefully, and it seemed that one medium slug would buy him a wad of paper that could be nothing other than the afternoon's news, after which he would get 2 smaller slugs and change. What? Buy him a paper, nothing other than the afternoon's news, after which he would get 2 smaller slugs and change. Oh, okay, it's just the exchange of money. Why did I get confused about the simple exchange of money? That one kind of blew my mind for a moment. He strode to the newsstand with a what the hell feeling and tossed down one of the medium slugs. He scooped up one of the papers and 2 of the smaller slugs and walked away without saying a word. The newsman watched the transaction without turning an eye. Then Faraday folded the paper through the middle and tucked it under his arm and sauntered along like an absent-minded professor until he found a quick grab joint that opened on the sidewalk. I don't know what a grab joint means. But that apparently was a 1950s thing. I guess food. He stood at the counter, scanning the wall menu. Oops, banged the table, as though he knew what he said until the waitress sounded off at him. Oh, he looked down at her with a frown of irritation. Then he waved 2 fingers at a hot plate, full of flat square things floating in an oily sea of juice. Yeah, folded his paper and immersed himself in a page while the waitress scooped up 2 of the flat things for the plate and slid them between folds of something like a bun. And he shoved them beneath the lower edge of Faraday's paper on a flat plate and stood there mewing at him like a trio of alley cats. Acting in an absent manner, Faraday took 2 of the larger slugs from his pocket and dropped them on the bar. The waitress took one, deposited it in the register with a shrug, as if she had seen oddly absorbed characters before, and returned with 3 of the smaller slugs which had piled on the bar beside Faraday's remaining coin. Oh, he munched at his greasy God-knows-what. That's fun. And while he mentally complained about the flavor and the greasiness, he was forced to admit that they were more satisfying than his earlier cold can of mixed space rations. Then he folded his paper, wondering whether he had been absorbed in the Lonely Hearts column, the local stock market, or a nice lurid sex slaying. Okay, and sauntered off toward the spaceport. He made it in easy steps, angling his way and this and that, wandering like Harun al-Rashid. I know exactly what that means. I don't. But feeling more like that other fabled Arabian who was forced to remain in the body of a stork because his bird's mouth could not pronounce a magic word in the proper language. No one paid him any attention. The sum and substance of his adventure, we can move on from this part. He could just stop writing about this. We get it. Of his adventure was the feeling that a hyena can walk through a monkey cage so long as the hyena has enough sense to wear monkey clothing and keep his big bazoo shut. And his opinion that is a damn shame that such nice appearing folks would be such lice. What? By the time Faraday returned to the vicinity of the spaceport, it was getting along toward the late afternoon, and it was a long day on Planet X. And if Faraday's judgment of time were anything worth mention, the day had still some hours to go until the real darkness came. He had no watch. A watch that would have come in handy for time estimating, even though there was still an excellent probability that the length of the day did not match anything like the Terrian standard of time. He had dumped his wristwatch along with his clothing because he was obviously alien, and the watch he wore was a victim's, but it was calibrated in Planet X's time, and Faraday had not had the chance to compare times. Oh my God, we get it. But nor to sit quietly and to observe the relative motions of the several hands around the dial. We get it. But it was too early. He had no other place to go. He could not see across the spaceport to the Lancaster, where the cranes still poised high and the work went on. But he still had no more urge to return to the city. Faraday observed the entry of others carefully and discovered that there was a couple of smaller ships taking on passengers and that a number of people were coming along to watch them off. And it looked like the operations around the average civilian spaceport where the people were not herded around or treated with suspicion. It caused Faraday to think that obviously the people of Planet X were all in accord on the plans to uncover the attack on Sol. Faraday smiled sourly, and on the planets of Sol, any such venture would have been greeted with every shade of reaction from eager applause to outright hostility. Faraday was more than willing to take advantage of their obvious self-confidence or lack of concern over the possibility of sabotage, espionage, or enemy action. He was fitting himself unobtrusively into a group of people who were entering the main gate of the spaceport when he heard a raucous toot, of an automobile horn. Like all the rest, Faraday turned to look. An official-looking limousine was slowly coming up that broad drive, and in it were a driver and 3 guards and "Norma Hannon!" he said with astonishment. Then Faraday felt the cold chill of fear crawl down his spine because he knew that he had made a hideous mistake. He turned away slowly, hoping that the others were turning as slowly to go about their own business, and he started toward the spaceport only to find the ununiformed guard barring his way. The guard chimed at him tersely. Faraday took his guts firmly and eyed the guard with contempt that he did not feel. "Talk Tyrian," he snapped. The guard blinked and chimed some more, less tersely, but no more or less demandingly. "Talk Tyrian," he snapped Faraday firmly, "or I don't hear you. I don't know how too many who have let down too often to relax into their own tongue. They aren't alive." What is he talking about? "I don't speak Terran very well." "Well, damn it, learn it," roared Faraday. "You'll be needing it soon enough. Now, what'd you have to say to me?" "Well, you heard me, but I'd rather..." Faraday relaxed his grin. "No, I didn't. You couldn't impugn my wife's virtue, and I wouldn't listen to you. Now, let's start over again." "I was going to ask..." "No," said Faraday shortly. "Not that way. I said start, and I meant that we'd start thinking in Terran. And I've learned to do. Now, you addressed me properly, and I said talk Terran." "Oh, look, you're not going to make me repeat it." "Why not?" "I feel like a fool. After all, a mistake is a mistake, isn't it? And I could hardly know that you were one of the Terran group. Could I? After all, you're not dressed in Terran clothing." Faradine saw a glimmer of doubt in the guard's face. Faradine should have been in Terran clothing if his intention was to stay as Terran as possible until the bitter end. He merely smiled, thinking fast. He said, "Oh, don't want to attract any more attention here than I do on Terra. Frankly, I'm masquerading here. See? Well, I guess you're right. You can speak to your own group, but others can see you. Tell me, sir, what is it like on planets of Sol? Pleasant enough. Is that so? I heard they were rich. But the people, are they as bad as I've heard?" "Worse," said Faradine, thinking of the propaganda that was universal as anything could be. He began to itch. How could he break this off before he really started to give himself away? The cold sweat had been running down his spine at the time of the guard's first hail, which had dried the exultation of knowing that he had succeeded in turning the guard's suspicion away, but started to itch again as another sweat came out of the wet, dried suit. "I get it. Okay, let's move on." Faradine was saved the trouble. The car tooted for attention again. Faradine turned to see it coming back from the spaceport. "Well, there goes another one," said the guard, nodding at the car. It had passed them, and Faradine saw, with less astonishment this time, that the new one was Howard Clevis. "Sure does," chuckled Faradine. And now, so do I. Oh, yeah, we got plenty of time to hop off of the colony, but go on, and good luck, and I'll remember what you said about thinking in Terran." Faradine waved and went to the spaceport. He was walking on wobbly legs because he did not know whether the guard would suddenly begin to suspect him and let fly. But as he repassed beyond range around the fantail big spacer, he relaxed once more. Faradine walked slowly out across the field, feeling let down. He had learned nothing from the day's wandering, but while he had dwaddled all over town, Norma Hannon and Howard Clevis had been within a shout of his Lancaster. Not that he could have done anything, but just being able to talk it over might have brought something out of the meeting up with him. Burp. Night was slow in coming, but Faradine loafed along his mile-and-a-half walk through the trails of the parked spacecraft until the darkness was well on its way. Two things he noted. The work crew along the Lancaster were polishing off the last bits as some of the trucks were folding down their ladders to prepare to take off for home. The other item was the position of lonely lighted porthole in the big starship. It had changed. To Faradine, this meant the only thing. Clevis had been in one stateroom from early that morning or late last night, but Norma had been missing. Now Norma was back to her own stateroom and Clevis was off. Possibly being questioned. Could he? Should he? Question mark. Questions raced through his mind, and if he did, would Norma be able to tell him anything? He had his own plans. Well, hide back his Lancaster and wait out for developments, and last long enough to throw a hard hammer lock on whatever pilot came to drive the Lanx and twist information out of him. Norma, he thought then, might know one thing. Their location. Oh, it'd be a help to know, for if push came to shove, Faradine was going to enter the Lancaster and take her up, and then he was going to go experiment with the auxiliary drive. He might die, but he's going to try this thing as soon as he knew that he could never find out without taking the long gamble. One of the work trucks came up to his mind for him. It turned from the Lancaster, and its headlamps cut a swath across the field, swinging toward Faradine, and it took Faradine less than a proverbial half-jiffy, a proverbial half-jiffy to come to the conclusion that bamboozling a guard at the gate was one thing, but to be found slinking around either near the Lancaster or the big starship was something else again. He avoided the lights of the truck, scooting up the landing ramp of the starship into the padlock. I hate all this. This is really boring. It occurred to Faradine that he was, with the lack of the people, including guards, out in his region of the space field, his way of protection. Any distant watcher seeing a figure out here would know automatically that the person was an intruder. Perhaps the only reason Faradine had not been hailed down was due to the known presence of workmen. Faradine lay with his chin, this is so boring, on the sill of the space lock and peered out as his truck went by, and it would be some time before they were all finished, he concluded, and so he decided to kill the time in action. Feeling his way along dark corridors, Faradine made his way aloft, up the stairways and around the circular floors till he came upon one door with a streak of light coming underneath it. The light helped him to see. The door was secured with a single bolt of the sliding variety. Easy to open from the outside, but impossible. I say impossible to move from within. Faradine slid... What kind of technology is this? Faradine slid the bolt and pushed the door open. Norma was standing inside, poised defiantly, with her hands on her hips, waiting. For a moment she did not recognize him, then her face twisted and said, "Well, if it isn't our interstellar man about space, Charles Faradine." Okay, well, that was boring and annoying. Why don't we go down to my basement and learn about new books? It's okay. Going to my basement's not weird, and it's totally normal, and it's fine. And also, in this kind of climate, a moistened basement's kind of healthy and good for the lungs. So why don't we go downstairs to my basement where I can tell you about the latest books from Penguin Random House. Oh, there you are. Well, welcome to my basement. And go ahead, have a seat there in that one folding chair underneath that naked light bulb, where I stand here, underneath this naked light bulb, and play my guitar for you. Which isn't creepy. It's totally normal. Yes, the basement has been hollowed out, and it's back to being a shithole. I'm trying to reimagine it. I've been playing a lot of Animal Crossing lately, so I'm kind of thinking about like new avenues and new things, exciting stuff to try with furniture here to make this a cool room. Not for teens, maybe a cool room for seniors who fall asleep at the library, perhaps. I don't know, I'm going in new directions. But let me tell you about the latest upcoming book from Penguin Random House called Prom Chanted by Morgan Matson. It's a teen and young adult fiction. You want to hear about it? Sure. Modern-day teens wander into Disney's Sleeping Beauty in this enemies to lovers rom-com from New York Times bestselling author Morgan Matson. Two modern teens, one classic fairy tale, absolutely no cell service. Stella Griffin doesn't believe in fairy tales. Ever since her boyfriend dumped her 3 weeks before the prom, not ideal timing, she's convinced every love story is a lie. She's ready to skip the prom entirely, but she and her best friend, Nisha, have been planning for years to celebrate in Disneyland before the prom. Oh, an OG tradition. What? But even being all dressed up at the happiest place on earth, this salvaging Stella's night, Nisha has brought along her friend Reese to join them, and she and Stella do not get along. Well, that's gonna be rich. But they're like oil and water. I bet they are. And cats and dogs. Yeah, Aladdin and Jafar. Okay, I don't know that reference. And what if Reese is fine, kind of cute? Well, Stella's over it all. Happy ever afters, true love's kisses, princes on white horses. It's not real. ... Or is it? Because when Stella and Reese's push through a hidden door in Sleeping Beauty's castle, they're not in Anaheim anymore. Oh, they're in the story. They're in Sleeping Beauty with Aurora and Philippe, the fairies, Maleficent, and extremely intelligent woodland creatures. Unfortunately, well, they landed right in the middle of the story, which throws things off. Suddenly, Aurora and Philippe are meeting before they're supposed to. The fairies are suspicious of the interlopers, and even Maleficent gets a word of their arrival. Stella and Reese will have to put aside their differences and make sure Aurora and Philippe fall in love. Get the story back on track, because if things don't end the way they're supposed to, ... they might never get home. Will they ever be able to pull off a fairy tale ending? And will Stella and Reese get a happily ever after of their own? Oh boy, well, I hope we find out. That's Prom Chanted by Morgan Matson. You get it for paperback for $12.99, January 7th, 2025, from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Bookshops.org, Hudson Booksellers, Powell's Target. I got nothing for this because it's so boring. Walmart. So with that, why don't we go back upstairs and continue reading another chapter of this book. Well, there you are. Why don't you put your legs in that chair? Let's continue reading. Now see here, he said shortly, Clevis must have told you about me. Well, I knew that you and Clevis had something cooked up together for the first time I saw him coming to Lancaster without a blazing gun in each hand, she said sourly. Well, then you ought to know that you're a damned idiot, Faraday, you bumbling fool. Well, but look, here I'm where? I was hiding in the inspection hatch and I couldn't see out. Don't you know where we are? Well, they didn't think I'd find it necessary to know, she replied bitingly, you fancy pants. Oh, Faraday swore in his throat. Well, now I'll ask you whose side you're on, he snapped. I came here to whose side I'm on, she laughed harshly. Yeah, whose side are you on? Faraday, I hope you're on their side. You're bound to lose them up sooner or later. Look, Norma, you come bubbling home with the bait in your mouth, unable to feel the hook, and hand it to Howard to get caught on. Go back to where you got that monkey costume and die. Norma, answer me one thing. Who was Frank Hannon? Frank was Howard's right-hand undercover man. Faraday, he had the goods on a man whose name and no one knows, and he didn't say because he didn't have the chance. Oh, you had it all with him when you dumped him in ceremony. Faraday eyed her coldly. Oh, there's one thing you've got to admit, he said. That tale of my three-tongued people was no lotus dream. Her silence was as good as grudging affirmation. So part of the pattern's cleared up, he went on, and if Clevis found me because I had 4 rotten years mucking toadstools of Venus, I'm not above wondering if this is not part of some master plan. Could someone have wrecked the ceremony and saved me to act someday as bait for Clevis? Isn't that just a bit far-fetched? Maybe not. Just think, we're not merely fighting an apparently ill-integrated mob of dope runners. We're fighting a blind battle against a whole culture that is calmly and maliciously undermining the moral fiber of the whole race, so that they can move in and take over with little to no opposition. Doesn't that make sense? Such a program has plans that extends for years. I may be only one small angle, although mine happens to be the angle that worked. Don't tell me that you expect warfare to run like a football game, complete with referees and penalties for kneeling a fallen contestant in the kidneys. Norma considered it a moment. Well, I suppose it does make sense. Any formal declaration of war is openly expressed intention of committing suicide. But if you explain yourself, if you can, Faraday shrugged. Well, maybe for the first time I outguessed them, he said hopefully. Then he went on to explain how he had done it in a few quick sentences. Then, he finished, the big ship didn't even try to find me. The little man that didn't escape, I also doubt that they knew where I was, or they had not let me have run free all over town. He went on and finished the tale of his peregrinations. That's a word? I'm going to look it up. Why do I do this to myself? Peregrinate. Travel or wander around from place to place. All right, you don't need a word for that. That's just stupid. We saw them catch the Lancaster, she said. We wondered why you suddenly went dead at the stick after giving such a chase. Well, I guess that's it. I'll go on the assumption that you aren't a Hellflower devil. Thanks, he said bitterly. And why the sudden change? Well, I've heard this three-toned language that everyone is so scornful about, and I've heard a lot of it. I know that a full-scale organization such as this bunch can and will pull together rather complicated capers, and so I'm no longer sure that it was your inept handling of a spacecraft that caused the death of my brother. Oh, he was on someone's trail, and I assumed it was you. Maybe it wasn't. And if it wasn't, then the ceremony affair was not even an accident on your part. So, damn you. I can't hate you anymore. You can't hate me? Not unless you can turn out to be one of this outfit. And for the life of me, I can't see just what you hope to learn from me that I didn't spill during this questionings. Did they? He let the rest of the sentence hang before he didn't know how to express it. They know everything I know, she said. I've been filled to the gills with something they shot out of a needle that made me as happily loquacious as a babbling marmoset. Did they explain why they brought you back here? It seems to me they'd imprisoned you. Well, that's for later. Now they're comparing my tale to Howard's, and after they get done comparing notes, they'll bring Howard back, and then we'll take a little jaunt to what they call their detention planet, where I'll meet a certain number of other Solarians who have gotten a bit too sharp for their liking. It is in another stellar system, I believe. Completely safe and far from home is the last lever of this war that they'll hold their lives, or a few 100,000 men and women over the heads of Terra. Faradine swore. The stinking bastards. Norma shook her head coolly. That's emotion, Charles, and I don't know exactly what their purpose is, but I do understand that there's a conflict of eventual survival and a rule of economic empire. But, Norma shook her head. Try the shoe on the other foot, Charles. Perhaps you've come upon these people with the rest of your kind. How would you see them? As possible allies and friends, balderdash. But you've seen them as possible customers and people to be exploited, and maybe enemies after you've seen their history. Their attitude is as arrogant as ours, and their personal justification as high. By some obscure luck of science, they got into interstellar travel before we did, and they automatically place us as an inferior position. But they also know that their inferiority is not so great as to make us a pushover. Oh, we're scientifically capable of discovering the interstellar drive at any moment, and why we have not is probably just a matter of our not combining the right sciences. Our knowledge of medicine is far vaster than theirs, for instance. Well, how can you know this? He asked. Norma opened a few buttons of her throat and slipped her dress down over one shoulder. There was a small circular bandage stuck to the spot. They took a sample of me, she said, because I seem to be immune to several diseases that should be giving me trouble. And when I asked about this, they told me that they hoped to discover what the cell change took place when we take our anti-cancer immunization. This thing that they have yet to discover. Oh, they use our immunization, she said, slipping the dress up, but forgetting to rebutton it. But they use it as an African witch doctor. Might use typhoid serum. I hate this. She nodded as she went on thinking. This thing that you have to remember, Charles, that if Terrans have arrived here first, there would have been the same conflict, but conducted from the other side. Faradine shook his head angrily. We're not inclined to ruin M-. Stop sounding like the King Arthur's knights, Men of sense and good judgment don't request their enemies to meet them in a field of honor. Instead, a state of war is assumed, and from that instant on, A is looking for a chance to stab B in the back, because he knows that B will cut him off at the hips, if he turns his back for a moment. Honor on that battlefield is accorded only to the defeated enemy. Up to the time he's defeated, anything goes. Now, both sides know that open warfare means total destruction. The process of either side is the one of boring within and gnawing at the foundation that's better to get involved in the places of ethics. We go from there. I hate this whole thing. If I knew how to run that Kadudi in Lancaster, we'd head for Saul. If I knew where Saul was from here. And how about Howard? Oh, I don't know about Clevis, he told her. The thing that would do would be to hike home as fast as we could and to spill our tale to the people who would know what to do about it. Let's face it, Norma. They can mingle with the Terrans because they can't speak our language. But I couldn't mingle with them to locate Howard. I'd be picked up in a minute. Well, how do we get back? Well, how do you think about the Lancaster? They probably fit her out to be a bona fide Hellflower runner. Okay, we'll hide out in my cubby until they run her back. Oh, God, another chapter of him hiding in a cubby, but now he's got like a woman with him. Probably going to get sexual. You go hide out, said Norman. If they find me missing, they'll know something smells bad. Well, Faradine chuckled. From what I know of them, they're as arrogantly secure as the gods of Olympus. Oh, some part of their gang still expecting me to turn up near Terra on an escape course. And the only smart thing I've done here is to not be where they plan for me to be. So we'll be where they don't expect us to be, and maybe we'll get away with it. Come on, let's hide out. The hitch in their plans came when Faradine led Norma down the stairs onto the last deck below and stopped, holding up a warning hand. What's the matter? She whispered. He pointed. The hatch had been used. It was lying to one side, and a beam of diffuse light was coming from below. There came also a triple-tongued voice of two men. Faraday led Norma one deck above where they could speak without attracting attention from the men below. They've installed the space drive in the inspection cubby, he said. And that's probably because that's what all the work was about. Oh, it's been from the bottom deck and permanently installed down in the cubby where it couldn't attract attention on a casual tour. Oh, maybe a different unit. I don't know. The temporary job might have been only a harness job to be used until they could haul Lonk's base for a teardown and a rebuild. I didn't see any work wagon, said Norma. Maybe not, but the workman is here, tuning up the drive. We can't get below now. Well, what do we do? I have half a hunch that they don't leave this ship standing idle long. Let's hide in the cargo hold till they stop tinkering. Norma nodded thoughtfully. Well, let's wait it out, she said. Then if we have trouble, I can slope and run out of here like a startled rabbit and draw the chase away from you. Well, you make the escape, he suggested, and I'll do the hare and the hounds. What the hell is going on? Norma shook her head. Let's use logic and not emotion, she said calmly. I'm known to be here, and you're not. So if I cut and run and they catch me, well, that's it. But if you're caught and running loose on this joint, they'll also start looking for me, and if I carry my point, you'll be unexpected. Follow? And someone may get back. The other way? No? It doesn't make any sense, because they don't really know about him. All right, I'm moving on. I suppose you're right. You know I am. It's just false chivalry. You might get caught, and we're all licked. He took a deep breath. You're right, of course. Well, now here we are, and we can be safe here. I think, he held up his hand abruptly, his ears, attuned to life aboard a spacer, had caught the sound of someone coming up the landing ramp, and on to the salon a few decks above, and then, as faint as if it were 100 yards away, but audible in the silence of the ship, they could hear the triple-tongued piping of a man. Oh, he was answered by Carolyn Niles. Speak Terran. Faraday nudged Norma. Oh, that's the line I used, and it worked. He chuckled. Yeah. Carolyn's companion said, why use this mono-voice junk? You know the rules. It's not smart to relax, you idiot. All right, so what's the answer? Ask me in Terran. All right, Your Highness. I was merely inquiring as to the imminence of your takeoff. Don't be insolent. We're taking off as soon as we're all aboard. Now, get along with your work. That entire interaction was useless. Nick's voice scared them both out of a year's growth. Oh, they'd been strained to hear Carolyn and her companion high above the salon, but now, with every nerve tense, the sound of the ship's intercom roared at them with terrifying volume. Carolyn Niles, go aloft, will you, and put the M-, there came a triple voice syllable, into standby. Carolyn's voice replied, Aye, firm. But look, boys, shouldn't we have some Terran term for the space drive? We ought to, acknowledged one of the men in inspection cubby. But how do you translate it into Terran terms when they have no term for it themselves? The other man said, well, we can always use space drive. No good. Better we didn't mention it all. Leave it as it is. Faraday whispered. Now, they're a candy bunch, huh? Talk to the language as always, act the part as always, live the life always, and cut your enemy short when he's looking for something alien. Another pair of feet came up the landing ramp, and Caroline said, almost at the same time, It's on. How is she working? Fine. We're finished. Coming up. I want to see. Okay, so you come down and see, and we're coming up and getting started. Pincered, said Faraday to Norma. He drew her to the cargo hold and handed her down the service ladder. She followed, closing the door behind him, and then, before he snapped out the lights, he reached up and removed one of them, saying, I don't think we'll have inspection, but if we do, having one lamp missing will cast a shadow we can stand in. This is a dimly lit joint at best. And he waved at the shadow caused by the empty socket and then snapped the lamp off. Their weight upon the cushion of flowers was released, and sat with their feet pulled up beneath them, not daring to say a word. Her breathing, her faint pressure of her shoulder against his, told him of her presence beside him. But he's horny now, even in this moment. They waited in the dark silence, listening and occasionally tensing instinctively when someone clumped past the wall outside or seemed to come near the cargo hatch above their heads. There were voices and calls and running feet from time to time, and then the humming sound of the conveyor belt. The hatch above was opened wide, but the lights were not put on. And then, from the end of the loose cargo conveyor came a tumbling shower of hail blossoms. They landed on the floor of the conical heap and kept coming until both Faraday and Norma, oh boy, were shoulder deep in them. The air filled with a thick, syrupy perfume. Faraday felt a slight spell of dizziness from the heady odor. Oh my God, they're going to have sex. And then wonder when the horrified interest just with the effect completely unpredictable overdose of dope would do to the woman. The shower of hellflowers came on, and Faraday was forced to stand because of their depth. Still, he found himself swimming off the depth in him. It reminded him of treading in haymow. Whatever. I'm not looking it up. The rain of blossoms ceased as the hold filled with the lights and went on briefly for inspection. Faraday was propped neck deep, his head barely below the ceiling, and he felt quite safe from detection unless the inspectors put their heads down the hatch to peer around the edge of the cylindrical hold. He looked at Norma. Oh, and she had scrabbled up and atop the pile, was lying with her back and her arms thrown over her head. Her eyes were... oh, no. Okay, so... I'm ready to drop this book if a sexual thing starts happening here, because he's setting up a situation where it's like it's not Faraday's fault that she's suddenly drugged up and ready for sex, and maybe he takes advantage of it. I don't know. Maybe it's not his fault. So I'm going to hate all of this if that's what happens. Her eyes were closed, but as she drew in a deep breath, the lids went half up, and she looked over at Faraday and smiled ecstatically. The hatch slammed down. And she said huskily, "Such nice friends you have, Charles." Oh, God, don't. He wanted to ask her if she didn't find the friendship a bit overpowering, but instead he said, "They're certainly no friends of mine, nor mine. But this is," and her voice trailed away to a whisper that he could not catch. Pressure came upsurging, and Faraday felt that he did not have to explain that the Lancaster was on its way to space and perhaps back toward home. In the midst of the takeoff, pressure was found. His hand drew it toward her. Oh, here we go. She snuggled her face against his palm. Okay, God, it's happening. Unless the author pulls this out at the last second, like gets him to not be a part of this. Her free hand came over and touched his cheek. And he ran back around his head. I knew this was going to happen until he could rest her head against his shoulder with her forehead against his face. Her fingers ran through his hair and pressed his face to hers. He tried to free himself, okay, so maybe he might avoid this, but he could not escape. Oh, but he can't escape without being rough about it, and believed that the only bold move to elude her would to bring forth either pleas or bitter demands loud enough to bring the enemy on the run. He struggled a bit, his hands closed on either side of her waist. Why? But instead of moving away, her body came forward against his. Oh my God, he's doing this. Then abruptly, the pressure of the drive went off, and they floated free. Their weight upon the cushion, the flowers released, and the springiness of the hell blossom thrust them up hard, hurling them against the ceiling. Norma's hands were dragged free of his head, and in clutching at him frantically, her fingernails raked his cheek. And that pressure he held against her waist thrust her away as soon as she lost her leverage. Well, the guy can't gain purchase. Her head hit the ceiling with a dull thunk, followed by a soft sound of her body hitting flat. A sigh came from her lips, God, and it was the sigh of an unconscious person. Okay, well, whatever. The hold was filled with hellflowers, floating free and spread apart by tiny pressure of the ends of their leaves and the petals. Faraday fought them away frantically, but only succeeded in digging himself deeper into the room. Eventually, he found the service ladder and clung to it, waving himself a breathing space by pushing the floating blossoms back. Norma's inert hand touched him limply. Faraday toyed with the idea of reviving her, but gave up instantly. Let her sleep it off. He preferred preferably alone and elsewhere in this hold. He gave the hand a push, and she floated from him in the dark, pushing through the free mass of her heavier inertia. The exertion had called upon his reserves, and he drank in the lungfuls of air that was sickly laden with heavy perfume. It made him dizzy again, and he fought for air, only succeeding in drawing more of the thick scent into his system. He wondered haphazardly what the effect of the overdose of Love Lotus might have on a man. The experiment had been tried, but not to this extent. So far, all it did was to make him feel as though he were being doctored with a dose of nitrous oxide. He scrabbled up the ladder and opened the hatch cautiously. It was as dark, so he's just going to leave her in the dark, just like swimming around in an overdose of these flowers. It was inside the ferret. I pushed the hatch up further, but put his face in the clean air and take a deep breath. Then, because he felt better, he climbed out of the hold and floated free in the air above the hatch. He latched onto a handrail and closed the hatch carefully, which, with a breath, you like 'em, baby. You breathe 'em until you get back. What the fuck does that mean? Then he sat in midair with one hand hooked in the rail and with a deep breaths of clean air, tried to think what to do next. Another close call. All right, why don't we go back down to the smoking room and review what the hell we just read? Oh, well, why don't you take a seat here in my smoking room? And there on the coffee table before you is a baboon skull. And if you open the top of that baboon skull, you'll find it's full of cigarettes. Oh, my wife's birds. Have a cigarette. Oh, they're delicious. What do we read? Well, not a whole lot. I got scared towards the end. Basically, the previous chapter was all about just him walking around the city, mixing in with the people, and then eventually he gets back to his ship. Then he sneaks on his ship, and then he finds what's-her-name there, and then she's like, I was tortured, or kind of. I was given drugs, and but blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, oh, you know everything? You told everything? Yes, I told everything because of the drugs. And like, okay. And then we should hide. Even though they left her on the ship. If anything, just let her stay on the ship. But for whatever reason, she's like, I should hide too, which is stupid. And so then she hides, and then all of a sudden the ship is like taken off into space as they're hiding in the little cargo hold. But apparently the cargo hold is filled with Hellflower. And so then now she's high, and he just leaves her in there to just stay high and overdose on Hellflower. But it was close. I was like, oh, God, no, something sexual is going to happen. He's going to be like, it's not my fault that they filled it with Hellflower, and now she's horny. And I was expecting that to happen, but it didn't happen, thank God. Also, not thank God. I'd love to stop reading this book, but this book is forcing me, to keep going against my will. It's not gotten bad yet. You can tell the author has fantasies about scenarios like this. He's just not fully writing out his fantasies. I feel kind of weird reading about him getting close to what you really know he's thinking, and he's not really writing it, and it's like I have to keep reading. So I kind of hate it a little bit, but I think we're like, God, 10 more chapters away. I don't know. I hope this book ends soon. Well, anyways, I hope you guys all had a great holiday. I'm done being sick. My leg's not so fat. And I guess life's just kind of going back to normal now. So with that, thanks for listening, and I will see you next week. Well, it appears you found me in the part of the podcast I hate the most, where I tell you all about the places on the internet where you can find me. You can tell I hate this because of the sound effects making it sound like a stormy night in the drawing room of the damned. Now, are you cool? I like cool people. It's the reason why I got involved in this business to begin with, just to meet cool people, not losers. So if you're cool, feel free to go over to my website, nuzzlehouse.com. But if you go there, you get to hear some of the other stuff that I and my wife work on, like the Radio Mystery Theater show, where we try to recreate the same show that used to be on in the 70s, but they don't make any episodes anymore. So we make our own, and we just steal all their commercials. And also Just Stay in the Curious Mind. We made a Christmas album. If you go to our link tree, you can see that we made a Christmas album. It's the first thing we did after getting married, which I think everyone should do when they get married, is start talking about the Christmas album they're going to make. And since I think you might be cool, you can always just email me directly. glenn.nuzzles@gmail.com. But don't email if you're a nerdlinger or a dork. Now, back to business. I can't believe I drank all of them already. There's got to be one left.